How's it going, everybody? Dr. Coin back at it again, and welcome to the Coin Cave. In today's episode of the history of Canadian coins and currency, we're going to be discussing the colony of Nova Scotia. Before I do get into this, I would really appreciate if you guys would hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you are new and you would like to see more coin collecting videos just like this. The country of Canada as we know it was not formed until the Confederation in the year 1867. What we know as provinces and cities today did not exist before the Confederation. Instead, most of the country would be made up of colonies that consisted of small towns and trading posts. Some of the large areas in what would eventually become Ontario and Quebec would separate and section off into Upper and Lower Canada, but most of the different colonies along the East Coast would stay independent. One of the earliest and longest standing was the colony of Nova Scotia. The history of its land spans over 1,000 years and has been inhabited by the First Nation tribes, the Mi'kmaq. It was first colonized in the early 1600s by French Catholic Acadians and some local First Nations. The early capital of Nova Scotia was Annapolis Royal, but between the time of colonization and the mid-1700s, European colonists and the Mi'kmaq tribe would be caught up in several wars until the capital would be moved to the newly built city of Halifax in 1749, and the colonial wars would come to a long rest just a decade later. Soon, settlers from New England would immigrate along with foreign Protestants. Until the late 1700s, the colony of Nova Scotia was a true maritime hub and occupied lands that are now Cape Breton, St. John's, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and parts of Maine. Prince Edward Island would eventually become its own colony in the year 1769, and New Brunswick would separate and establish itself in the year 1784. Throughout its early days in the 1700s, the most popular coins and form of payment in Nova Scotia and Halifax were Spanish milled silver dollars. Britain would attempt to ship farthings and halfpennies, but the Spanish dollar would be so popular amongst traders and merchants that they would overvalue and trade them for an extra 6 pence over their silver value just to keep them circulating and incentivize others to keep bringing them into port. Throughout the late 1700s and early 1800s, the docks in Nova Scotia and Halifax saw some of the heaviest volumes of trade in the entire world. Lack of popularity in the farthings and halfpennies would make it difficult for Britain to regulate the currency of the colony. In an effort to solve this problem, the British Colonial Office commissioned the Royal Mint in London and the Birmingham Mint to start producing penny and halfpenny trade tokens for use in the colonies. One of the first of these tokens that was ever issued is the Trade and Navigation tokens from 1812 to 1814. These tokens first arrived in Halifax in the year 1812. The master matrix was engraved at the Birmingham Mint, and something that makes these very interesting is that they were struck over the 1811 Guppy tokens rather than using blank planchettes. These tokens would end up being incredibly practical for trade. Their use would become widespread, and just 2 years later, they would release a second design. In the year 1814, the Broke tokens were released around the ports of Nova Scotia. These would be the first ever coins produced specifically for the colony's circulation and use. The bust portrays Captain P.B. Vere Broke, a British Navy hero from the War of 1812. Two different variations exist for this date, a light and heavy token. The different varieties suggest that each of them were struck at different mints. Most merchants and businesses would start to produce and issue trade tokens and pennies of their own, with the tokens being redeemable or payable by the company that issued them. Companies would put their names, logos, and busts to set them apart, but some companies would try to make generic designs in an attempt to scam traders by insisting that that was not theirs to honor. By 1817, the British Colonial Office had decided the importation of private pennies had grown beyond their control, and they were banned from input. Many tokens were pulled from circulation and sent to Prince Edward Island, which was lacking in forms of payment and mediums of exchange. This would prove to be a huge mistake, as the colony was sent into a similar copper shortage, the likes they had seen just years earlier. To solve this problem, without the knowledge of any home government and the help of the colonial treasurer and some private coin makers from England, they would produce and issue halfpenny and penny coins. They would portray a bust of King George IV with a thistle branch on the reverse. The coins were extremely popular and solved the copper shortage. They would continue with the thistle design, changing the obverse designs to accommodate the monarch changes of King William IV and Queen Victoria. In the mid-1850s, the British Colonial Office would change policy on overseas coinage, and the colony would gain permission to finally produce its own legitimate run of pennies and halfpennies. British mint engraver C.C. Wyon would design the master matrix to keep with the theme of the well-received thistle tokens. The reverse would be designed with a Mayflower, which would eventually become the official flower for Nova Scotia. When these new pre-decimal pennies were introduced, one of the intentions was to phase out the trade dollar, so whether it was due to popularity or an homage to the previous design, the word token was left on these pennies. Now, the majority of the 1850s pre-decimal pennies were composed of bronze, but there are said to be a few that were struck in brass that are much more rare and valuable. Just 3 years later, in 1860, design and production for the Nova Scotia decimal coinage would begin. The first few years would have its hiccups. This would make for several patterns and varieties in the 1860 and 1861 dates. For many of these examples, only the dies and matrices remain. The coins have not been accounted for. Whether they were destroyed or not put out into circulation, it is unknown. Eventually, the problems were ironed out, and many of these Nova Scotia pennies and halfpennies started to enter circulation. The reverse design for the penny and halfpenny portrays a crown encompassed by a wreath of roses. The date will be under the crown and the denomination will be above. The obverse design features a bust of Queen Victoria. It was the same bust that was used for the British farthing just the year earlier, and also for the new unauthorized New Brunswick cent. These pennies eliminated the need for silver coinage in the colonies, as the 1 cent would equate to a British halfpenny, or a 6 pence would equate to 12.5 of these cents. These pennies would be generally accepted by the public and would see widespread use along with paper money. Nova Scotia and its capital city of Halifax governed itself from the year 1848 until it joined the Confederation and became a province in the year 1867. The city of Halifax is one of the oldest, most important, and historic cities in the entire country of Canada. If not for this Atlantic trading hub, Canada may not have been able to thrive so much in its early days. If you just stop and think of all of the goods that were coming in and out of the ports of Nova Scotia on a daily basis, all of the currency that was changing hands, from the Spanish milled silver dollars to all of the American dollars and gold pieces, all over the world were being used and accepted in the colony. So it's not too unreasonable to think that if you were to travel there, you may have a better chance of finding some of this old stuff, whether you're looking in coin shops, antique shops, or maybe you just go pick up a box of coins from the bank. You never know what is lying around, and I would think the older and more historic the city, the better chance of finding some of these treasures. Now, I did mention that some merchants and businessmen would actually issue trade tokens of their own in the 17 and 1800s. If you can find any of these, they're worth decent money, and they are probably pretty rare. I would say you have a lot better chance finding them if you actually live out on the East Coast. You are definitely going to pay higher premiums on stuff like this the farther inland that you get. Now, there were trade tokens that were issued by Upper and Lower Canada around this period of time, and I am going to make some videos on those in the future because there are some very cool tokens, like the Double Eagle token is one that is quite valuable and very rare. A lot of people like that one. And of course the Dragon Slayer tokens, those are very nice, the pennies and half pennies. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up. please subscribe. I would appreciate that so much. This is just the tip of the iceberg, guys. We got a whole lot more to cover when it comes to the history of Canadian coins and currency. The next video I probably do will be on Newfoundland coinage, because Newfoundland was another colony that was producing its own coinage until World War II, actually. So super fascinating history. I'm definitely excited to get into that, but I think that's going to do it for this one, guys. So thank you so much for watching. Until the next one, everybody, peace out and have